help me out and with a little explanation of like who you are and what you're up
Yeah.
to and what you've built.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Chris Marhefka. I consider myself a leader, a coach, a facilitator, an entrepreneur. Um, I have been a lifelong learner. I would consider myself to have a growth mindset for sure from the earliest I can remember. And so I was always developing in something. And for a large majority of my life, that was my physical body and my health. I got really into competitive athletics and then training and all sorts of different competitive activities with my body. And then that actually crossed me over into the world of mindset coaching because you'd really reach the perceived limits of the body. And then you just turn the notch one more in your mind. And then all of a sudden, abracadabra, you have more capacity. So I got really into high performance mindset. And all the while I was doing it and experimenting on myself, I was also teaching and coaching others to do it. So I've been a coach for a very long time, about 15 years and and then I got to the point where I was doing this really high level coaching and even doing business coaching and CEOs and entrepreneurs. And then we would get to the point to where the mind would get to its almost like capacity, conscious capacity. And then we would keep circling back to the same things in the conscious mind. And then that's when I discovered the work that I do now, which is a little bit of a kind of woo in the world of personal development, but it's like what's happening below the surface of what we can actually see, hear, experience, think about. And these are the unconscious patterns that we all have, the unconscious beliefs that we all have. And what I focus on with people is identifying what are the things that are holding you back in life, these beliefs that are running the show, and then teaching people how to systematically pull them out from the root and then replace them with
Mm.
something that does serve them. And it's really powerful work because everyone has them to an extent. We're all limited by some ceiling. It's just a matter of which ceiling and how much are we aware of that ceiling.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh wow, that sounds great. By the way, I mean, it seems like you're most likely much more advanced in a lot of that stuff, which I'm excited to talk to you about it. The growth mindset thing, I had that from a very young age. I'm 38 now, and I remember. But the thing I want to say is, I didn't have it since I was like born. Like I was in the matrix almost, and then something happened. I It was one of my ex girlfriends that was with this lady at the time, and she was really hot on things like Anthony Robbins and Dale Carnegie and old school personal development gurus, right? And she introduced me to that, along with the spiritual aspect, which was at the time Eckhart Tolle and Grace and Grit guy Ken Wilber, and I
Ooh,
just
yeah.
really loved that. I mean, I thought it was like an eye opening. It just really cracked through this layer of opaqueness that I couldn't see behind. It broke straight through it, and all of a sudden, this new world opened up to me. And it's such a liberating feeling for someone who wasn't always aware of it. And so, were you said you were like kind of born like that?
So
You've always been that way.
that's a really great distinction because I was born with this like drive to get better at things, but I wasn't really aware of anything deeper. I didn't really understand personal development until I was high school. Actually, I had a little bit of a rich dad, poor dad situation myself with and it wasn't all necessarily related to money, but a lot of it was. One of my best friends, his parents were very much into personal development. Same thing, like the Zig Ziglars and the Tony Robbins and yeah, a lot of the just old school, like inspirational, motivational. They gave me The Secret. They gave me Rich Dad Poor Dad, Richest Man in Babylon, like all these like really old time tested books. And I just dove right into that world. And from that time, from when I was about in high school to um, probably almost 30 years old, 28, 29, I was in the information consumption phase of personal development where I was just taking it all in, going to the seminars, listening to the podcasts. And that is when actually that broke me out of the go to school, get a good job, and just work until you retire mindset into entrepreneur mindset. Those
Right.
books were what kind of broke me out of that um, place that I was in, and then that took me through about a 11-year process of entrepreneurship when it was all about me getting better for my business. So everything was about like
Mm.
working on me, but so that my business could be better. So it was maybe better communication with employees, or better leading, or better setting strategy or marketing. And I, like I said, I grew a lot in that way, and that was really intentional growth. And but it was always cognitive. It was always like, okay, if I do this, then I'll get this result. And then it was this A to B all the time, and I had to like understand that. It wasn't until, like I said, I got into this stuff that was below the surface that I started to really understand what was driving me. And what I mean by that is like there was layer deep this experience that I had as a child that caused me to not trust other people fully. And so that was playing
Mm.
out with my wife, that was playing out with all of my employees and my management. And so I would trust.
How old were you when you got married?
I was actually 29. 29. And so
Okay.
I had a period of about a decade to where I was like all in on growing businesses. I was an entrepreneur, and like that was priority number one. I did meet my wife during that time, and we did get married, but it was like my mind was all in business. Um, and it was actually right around my 30th birthday when I had this realization that I had checked all the boxes of the goals I had set: the money, the family, the career, the community, the impact, but it didn't feel the way that I thought it would feel. And it was like this,
Mm.
like almost like crushing, conflicting moment where from the outside looking in, everyone was like, "Oh, your life's so great. Like, congratulations on all your achievements." But internally, I was like, "What the hell is wrong with me? I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel like happy. I don't feel excited about waking up in the morning." And those were all things that I thought would come as a result of the achievements. And then once I started peeling back the layers, I found that there were things that were much deeper. They were causing me to not feel fulfilled, to not feel happy, to not feel satisfied with the achievement, and just bumping to the next achievement and the next achievement. And so once I shifted and healed those things that were underneath the surface, the same actions would result in a different experience for me. So
Mm.
I could hit a goal today, and I'll celebrate it, I'll enjoy it, I'll revel in it, like I'll appreciate it. So I still set those goals, but it's from a different energy. It's from a growth and getting better from the instead of back then, most of my goals were because I felt like I wasn't enough. It was like, "Oh, I've got to
Yeah.
set these physical goals because I don't feel like I'm fit enough or good looking enough. I've got to set these business goals because look at what so and so over there is doing. They just raised $1 million. I got to go raise a million. Look at." And that
But it
was.
never ends, right? It's like that you've addressed the cause, so it's no longer something that you need to feed.
Mhm. Yeah.
I went through something really similar, eerily similar, we could say. I mean, well, there was a time when I was in a masterminds, and if don't someone listening doesn't know what a mastermind is, basically a group of high achievers, right, who want to achieve more, and so they help each other to do more business and make more connections and generally grow. And in those groups, what I found was there's a like kind of like a prevailing energy of just I'm not
Yeah.
enough around mostly men, but there's women in there too. But it's mostly men. I mean, it's a male thing, I think, for the most part, and we could probably talk about that. But um, let's just say it's a masculine thing, and it really makes a lot of sense to me when you come to the conclusion that uh, you can have the same goals, but if you're being driven by a feeling of lack, you are going to be in for a rude awakening when you finally get there,
Yeah.
because it still lives in you. The lack is still there. You haven't changed anything. It's like giving a Lamborghini to someone who is just so insecure about themselves. I mean, you take the Lamborghini away from them, and it's like Captain America. You take the suit away, who are you?
Yeah.
It's like you take the Lamborghini away, who the hell are you? You know, same person you were before, if not even probably even worse now, because you've already had the Lamborghini. Now you feel even
Hmm.
worse. So I went through a strange transformation, and it's not easy, man. It's a very, and vulnerability is something that I wanted to talk to you about, because I've watched some of the content you create on your profile on Instagram, and a lot of it is about like addressing these false
Hmm.
tropes, these stereotypes that are kind of, for lack of a better word, toxic. I don't really like that word, but they are toxic, and somehow they've kind of become part of that self-development narrative right now, where everything has to be plush, everything has to be like a-okay, positive,
Yep.
nothing's wrong here, let's not talk about it. And I get it, I totally get it, but I think you have to be really vulnerable and open to the full spectrum of human emotion and consequences and circumstances to be able to make that kind of distinction where you say, you know what, I'm going to take a look deep inside and find out what the fuck is actually really going on with me. And if it's going to hurt like hell, because I'm going to have to confront the fact that I haven't accomplished these things, or I didn't do this when I thought I should have, or I haven't worked on this part of me. And all of that is kind of like reaffirming to the ego that you're just not enough, but it's also part of the cure to get to the point where you don't have to feel that way anymore. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The word that was coming to me is just realness, like showing people the realness of humanity. And the realness of humanity isn't always on top of the mountain and sunshine and rainbows. And I think there's usefulness if you're in the deepest, darkest depression to wanting to be happy. Like I think there's some usefulness to that, like that glimmer of hope. But once you're out of that, then you really have to address the what's underneath. And so I always say, like, there's things that are really effective to light the spark that are not as effective to make the transformation. And a lot of people will go through the development world with a lot of sparks, and they're just looking for the next spark, the next experience, the next speaker, the next quotable meme to give them a spark for a moment. And I did that for a very long time, so I understand it and I have a lot of compassion for it. But there's a next. There's a okay. Now, once we have the spark, now what do we do to fuel the fire and to really, really transform who we really are, so that we're not just repeating and getting another spark the next day and the next day and the next day. And
Mm-hmm,
that it's
mm-hmm.
it's a different method.
Right, and you've kind of like alluded to the point where maybe what you do in between critical events is actually more important than what happens during those
Exactly.
events. It's like the sharpening of the
Yep.
saw. It's like the Spartans training protocol. It's like
Mhm.
Michael Jordan's overnight success.
Yeah.
It's really all of the things that lead up to that key moment that you've been working on. And when you look at MMA fighters, you can, like, I'll use an example. So Conor McGregor used to be like the greatest of all time, right? And in his weight division, and he was unstoppable. And then when you get to a certain degree of success, and you go and you dilute your focus with his whiskey company and his other responsibilities, and then you come back, you've lost all of that sharpening of the saw, and you lose.
Yeah.
And you can't win anymore because the other person's just that much higher than you now in terms of his performance. So
Yeah, and they're the ones that are sharpening the sword, the people that are
that's
in the
it.
craft and doing the thing. And so from that analogy is like people's themself, their beingness has to be the sword, like constantly sharpening that, especially if you're in a phase of transformation, or if you're leaning into change, or if you're wanting change in your life. You really have to put the focus on that. It's not a passive activity. It's not. It's like physical training. I use these examples all the time because I spent half or more of my lifetime in this world. It's just like training your body. Is like, you don't go into the gym one day, do a few squats and be like, Where's the development in my butt? Like where's the results? No, you go in, you trust the process and you do it, and you do the same thing the next day, you do the same thing the next day, you do the same thing. And then one day you look and you're like, wow, I'm so much stronger, I'm fitter, I'm leaner, I'm whatever the goal and outcome is. But it's the same thing with our development, our emotional development, our mental development. It's the what you do when no one's watching. It's the what you do when you wake up in the morning. It's the what you do when you feel like not wanting to do the thing. You do it anyway, and you practice those things that you know are good for you. And I say it with a lot of like simplicity, but it's not easy for people, because when we are feeling the worst, and the thing would be the most useful is the last time we would want to do the thing.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
This is a question that I have actually, is like, if it's the most important thing to do the everyday work, and you're not like, okay, there's a power in having ego,
mhm,
because you're always
yeah,
fueled. You're always
yeah,
fueled. Like, you can always convince yourself that it's not enough. There's something else you need to do, something else you need to achieve or be loved for. So when you lose that and you come in it from a different mentality, you're coming at it from a kind of like, I'm doing this because I enjoy the process, because I want to be better for other people, not because I want other people to love me more. But then it's a different
yeah.
fuel. It's like, it's not as brute
No.
force. I think it's how would you explain that? How do you do it sharpening the sword when you're not being fueled by insecurity?
Yeah, it's those are I would say it's almost like the we just explained the first two of the three phases, is that a lot of people are in that phase where they almost need the ego to push them to do the thing for the first time. And that's the first step. That's like the leap, is like, okay, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to go hire a personal trainer. I'm going to go hire a coach. I'm going to go clean up my diet. I'm going to read this, start journaling, whatever the thing is. But it's that ego bump. And then now they're in the practice. And that part is, I'm trying to, I'm trying to pay attention to people and see the difference between the people that do it and the people that don't. And the only correlation that I've seen is the people that will do it with this work, they've had practice in something else. So what I mean by that is, maybe they learned how to play the violin as a kid, and they picked up the violin every day and they just played it just a little bit. Didn't matter what the outcome was. They were always getting better just by picking it up. Or maybe it was on the soccer field. They would go out and they would practice every day, and then maybe after practice they would go for a little run on their own to get more fit. It's those people that have had a practice of repetition without, it's almost like without immediate purpose, that do well with that second phase. And if people haven't had it in their past, it's going to take some level of structure, support, um, or those are probably the
You're gonna
two
have to
most
basically starting
important.
from scratch kind of
Yeah,
thing,
it's
as opposed to already having some
yeah,
muscles to be able to like kind of drive it.
exactly. And so I had that. I was a lifelong athlete and I understood what training was like. And so when I did this work, it was just like, okay, I'm just going to do the thing. They're telling me to journal every day. Okay, I'll just journal every day. And
Yeah.
so if people don't have that, I think that's where structure and support are so valuable, is because it literally gives you that container to not want to do it. And they're like a coach on a sports team is like, nope, we're going to practice today anyway. Oh, I know you're a little tired, we're still going to do something. And that is,
And that would generally be younger people, right?
yeah,
Because of the fact that older people have had like a career, they've
yeah,
had like some kind of
yep,
discipline that's necessary.
yep,
Younger people are just coming into things, and they're plagued by social media and consumption of like, just that dopamine effect of the instant pleasure. I see that as a huge problem. I don't know about
me
you,
too.
but I know that delayed gratification is the biggest, identifier of success in life. And so without that, which is basically what happens when you get addicted to instant gratification, I think we're in for a bit of a challenging time to try and help people get back on track. Um, What are your thoughts about all of this with the younger generations? And
Yeah, I think it definitely has a lot to do with what they grew up with of technology and the speed of it and instant gratification in that way. And literally, things are designed to manipulate our internal systems, and they're doing a really good job of it. And so it's almost like people, like the human biology doesn't have a chance against Instagram. It doesn't. Like we're not
yeah.
designed for that much stimulus. And so, my thoughts are that yeah, we are going to have a big problem. We're going to have a big social problem where people are no longer able to interact with each other as humans.
Right, because the community is kind of like no longer physical. It's
Yeah,
just online. There's no real
yeah,
interaction.
and also people are even unable to. Communication is breaking down so much that it's like people don't even know how to relate and interact with each other
Mm.
without being triggered or triggering someone else and not knowing how to be in that and feel that. And yeah, I think it's a real problem. And then with the instant gratification, it's like I think there's some level of breaking point in each individual when they realize, like, oh, I can't just have it my way all the time right now in this moment. Oh, I want this person to change for me, but they're not. And people will keep trying to do it until they reach the point to the where they realize, like, oh, this isn't really how this works. I've been trying for a long time, and sometimes people will succumb to it and they will give me what I want. And so this is part of like the stuff we do in inner child development of like, what happened when you cried because you didn't get the candy? Did mom give it to you or did she not? And so this all this stuff is really, really important. And um yeah, with instant gratification, we know that most things that are uncomfortable for us in the short term, uncomfortable in our system, they don't feel good, maybe a little, are good for us in the long term. And the exact opposite. If it's comfortable for us now, it's likely not good for us in some way in the long term. And we're
Mm.
just in this constant pursuit of comfort and ease. And it already is, but will continue to cause more and more problems physically, emotionally, mentally. Um, yeah.
It's such a big challenge. I mean, even I have
Mhm.
challenges with it. I am, I would say, quite addicted to social media just because of the fact that it's so clever
It's so
at
good.
taking advantage of your biases and your heart, your biological wiring. And I force myself to do the things that are not comfortable right now, but it is a struggle sometimes to do it. But like you said, if you've got some
Mm,
experience, it's a little bit easier. What I think might help younger people, and this is just a theory that I thought of right now, is you were talking about things in a way that alluded to some kind of neuroplasticity, like where you've got not just one thing that you've kind of learned, but a
mhm,
few. And if the more things you learn, like let's say playing the piano or learning a new language, you're creating some kind of neuroplasticity. And I think that younger generations are more generally kind of skilled. Like they've got a bit of skill in this, a bit of skill in that, a bit of skill in that. So the interesting thing would be to see if you can get rid of the anxiety
yes.
that's caused,
Yeah.
maybe they're going to be even better at like crushing whatever things that they need to do. Because you know, I don't know if Michael Schumacher would have been as good at doing the Formula One if he wasn't a great skier too, right? And it's
Yeah.
arguable at what point you would want to taper off those other activities because you wouldn't be able to
You
master
wouldn't
your craft.
master
But
is
like
extreme. Yeah.
exactly, it's like a mastery. But like that's an interesting thought. Is does mastery only come with doing one specific thing, or is there like a threshold where you have to like get some
Mhm.
neuroplasticity from other areas? And that would be so. I do think that young kids have an advantage in a way, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been very interested in that for a long time. And my initial interest was around the physical body. And so what they've been showing in so much research is that there are much more injuries through teen years, through early adulthood of kids that only played one sport because they thought they had to master it from an early age,
Oh, right.
especially the
Yeah.
physical ones. and there's significantly more joint injuries and back injuries and ankle and knees and hips and shoulders, um, because it's almost like we're only training that one thing, and if they misstep one way, boom, there it goes. But the benefit of doing multiple things is it builds a solid foundation when you want the foundation to be built at the beginning. And the same thing goes with our mind. With people that are at a young age doing a lot of different things, they're developing all of those pathways to be really good, so that as they get more narrow later in life, they have a really strong um, history experience of that connection. And so it's easier for them to turn on to mastery in one thing because they've greased the grooves of a lot of different things. Yeah.
Nice. You know, it's the fucking anxiety, man. That's the thing. I think they need to get through is that
Yeah.
anxiety. It's a killer. Uh, I have a friend who I interviewed for a previous podcast, and his name is Hayden Wiseman, and he's friends with Jujimufu. You know
I don't
Jujimufu?
know. Mm.
Jujimufu is this massive guy who lifts weights and just like with like one hand, and he does backflips and things, and he's crazy. He's all over
That's
Instagram,
amazing.
and those guys are called tricksters. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like a martial arts form, but with lots of acrobatics in it. So you can kind of do flips and just like twirls and things, and it looks so fantastic. But usually, tricksters are so well built because of the force they need to thrust themselves with. So they're bodybuilders at the same time. And Hayden got into bodybuilding recently, like competitive bodybuilding. And he developed so much strength in a short space of time. I've never seen anything like it. And he said to me, the advantage that he has over like traditional bodybuilders is that his body and his tendons and his joints are just so solid because of all of the, practical functional movements that he's had to put his body through. And it kind of dawned on me that like I'll probably never have that because I've always been an isolationist. Like I'll do bicep curls, I'll do like squats, but my joints aren't getting stronger. Like maybe my muscles are, and it kind of sucks because I love the idea of having that
Yeah.
foundation, you know.
Yeah. And they say that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
That is
And it,
not a promising quote.
yeah, yeah. And it's like, yeah, I hear that from almost every person universally that does the work with me is like, wow, I wish I would have had this 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. And it's like, yeah, and you may not have been ready for it then. And it's like, you, you get to something when you're ready to take it on. And, yeah, that the
Mm,
physical analogy makes so much sense to people because I think they can see it, they can see
yeah,
the difference.
yeah.
Um,
So you talk a lot about
mhm.
sovereignty. You talk a lot about personal freedom and
Yeah.
responsibility, which is a key topic right
Yes.
now. I definitely want to do a lot more content around
Yeah.
responsibility. So let's talk about it. I mean, first, maybe what we could start with would be like where are we right now in terms of our society and how did we even get here? Like there's a lot of shit going on and I don't fully understand
Yeah.
it, but I know enough to say we are in a bad
Yeah.
spot, especially in the US and certain parts of Europe. So, with COVID was like the catalyst, I think, for a lot of this. And then we saw how weak we really are as a society
Yeah.
and how easily we can be manipulated. Well, what are your thoughts anyway? Firstly, about like COVID and everything that's happened around it, and how did it affect you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's first off, like it's like the first thing I always say is whenever we go into any discussion about the collective experience, that is the most complex topic we can talk about. And so I like to get really specific about what we're talking about it when we are, because one of the easiest things that happens for people is they get confused, or they use their own perceptions to think we're talking about something else. And so when I'm communicating about things that are really emotionally charged for people, I like to make sure we're clear on like what we're naming at any given time. And what I like to talk about first generally is like how we're at the point where we are today with people's um, how we are at the point today when it comes to individual personal responsibility of self, and what we're seeing as far as like power and safety and these words that are being thrown around. Um, and I'll start by saying that it goes back a lot further than 2020. We have been, as individuals, especially in the United States, giving our power of self away for a very long time. And what I mean by that is not in a political way. So think about personal. We'll start with something simple like food. Uh, World War II times, I think they say somewhere about 70 to 80% of the food or the produce was grown in a backyard that a family ate.
Wow.
Yeah. And now it's, I don't know what the numbers now, what, 2%, 1%. I know very few people in my circles, there's a
Very
lot,
few.
but very few average people that have gardens. And so that would be an example. We started outsourcing our food to someone else. We were giving the power of our food and nutrition over to someone. Um, Money. There was no such thing as wealth management in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There was no such thing as you made decisions that you thought were best for you, and you had an understanding of the responsibility of when you got money, what to do with it, and then how to spend it intelligently for you. Now, most people don't even know really how much they spend. They only know how much they make because it's how much they spend and maybe a little less. Um, and then with anything left over, they're giving it away to someone else to say, "Hey, deal with this because I don't want the responsibility of handling it." We've been doing it with our medical decisions. It's what I hear that it saddens me more than anything is that people believe that there's all of these individuals outside of themselves, most that don't even know who they are or anything about them, that people are thinking that they know better what's good for their body than they
Yes.
do. And I'm not getting into anything political here. I'm just saying that, like, we all, when we start taking responsibility for knowing what's happening in our body and what affects it and how we can improve it and what harms it, we can take information in and process it much more intelligently for us. And we can say, like, we don't have to prescribe to, the next fad diet, like, what is it, like keto, whatever, like, oh, carbs are bad, so I'm not
Not a big
gonna eat
keto
carbs.
fan.
Okay, just eat some carbs, see what happens, and like that type of thing. Um and same thing with um really any information that comes in. Now we can transition from the body to the mind as well. People have been outsourcing their thinking to other people.
That's a great way to say it.
It,
Yeah.
and like,
To MSNBC.
yeah, all of them, and you can choose to do that if you want, but how is it working out for you is always my question. Is like, is your life better by doing that? And what I see is unequivocally for myself. When I take information in, I process it through my filters. I understand that I have biases, and I try to be aware of as many of my biases as I can. And then I make a decision that's best for me. I can stand in that decision very confidently and say, "Yeah, I've actually gone through all of this, and as new information comes in, I'll let that process back through and maybe a new decision's made." We're not doing that right now. We're not doing that.
Mm.
And unfortunately, people are accepting decisions being made for them without processing them through their own filters of what's best for them. And I think it's really dangerous to the individual, and anything that's dangerous to the individual is dangerous to the collective. And so the more
Yeah.
and vice versa, the more we can know what's best for us, take individual responsibility and make choices that are best for us, that will be better for the collective. I know people aren't
Mhm.
thinking that way because they're only thinking in linear binary decisions of like, everyone needs to stay inside so that everyone is safer. But we're only
Mhm.
looking
Mhm.
at from where one very narrow point of view. Do we
Mhm.
actually know that? No, we don't. We believed it for a short time, and some people are still very much believing it. But if you look at, filter it through the history of humanity, yeah, maybe if you stay inside in a cave in a dark room and you don't have contact with anything or any that may
Then you're never
keep
going to
you
catch
not
anything, right? I
ill
mean,
for a
it's
period of time,
right.
but your life for the very short time that it lives is going to be very miserable and it's not going to be human. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, I mean, there's a lot of arguments too
yeah,
about, well, you get vitamin D
yeah,
from the sunlight. You get like it doesn't really transmit easily outside,
mhm,
outdoors. Parks are closed. Playgrounds, socializing is just reduced. There's a lot of negatives to
yeah,
it,
and with,
and I don't want to bring us into the hole, but you know what I mean.
yeah.
Like there is a lot to that right
And
there.
with
It's
the work that I do, it's all in what's happening inside of people. And so when I hear the effects of what's happening outside happening inside on people, when I hear what people are experiencing as a result of this, our mental health issue, especially in this country, that was already probably one of the biggest issues that we were facing that wasn't being acknowledged, is going to be exponential. The work I do is specifically in childhood development and what is missing, what are unhealthy, and literally we are suppressing some of the most important things about childhood development, and we're not allowing them to happen. So
okay.
we already had children that weren't getting the development they needed because of screens and technology, and now we're adding in the biological things, the even more social things, the fear, the conditioning people to be afraid of other people and children to be afraid of other humans. It's a
Hmm.
dangerous thing.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that
Very.
individual decisions are not useful for a period of time to get through catastrophic events, but like I think we have to look at this a little bit different at this point. This isn't 2 weeks. This is like we're creating a new society with the decisions we're making today. And we have to ask ourselves, are we actually accepting this despite, even despite what we may believe there to be a risk in the short term? Maybe.
I, I feel guilty in the sense that, well, I had COVID, very early
Me
on,
too.
actually.
Yeah.
It didn't affect me much. I had very little, if any, symptoms. So I was one of the lucky ones. In fact, it just so turns out, I guess most people are one of the lucky ones, but I didn't have any
Yeah.
symptoms. And I was against the vaccine. I knew what was happening. I
Yeah.
knew what was kind of coming, and these mandates that are now being talked about and really pushed heavily. And I feel guilty because I got the
Mhm.
vaccine. I feel guilty that I chose my own preferences of
Mhm.
travel and having fun and experiencing things, and even to the point of like, okay, I want to do business as
Yeah.
well, right? I want to travel and do business. I feel slightly guilty that I gave in, because the more people that give in to this, the more possible it becomes to just have people do the things that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Um, and we do need to make a stand to some degree. Like but then it definitely becomes very political, because now you're talking about, well, okay, how do we meet in the middle
Right.
somewhere? Like, you've got a lot of good arguments for protecting people around you, but then you've also got incredibly good arguments for, let's not destroy everything
Right.
just because of this one
Right.
virus.
And like,
So I feel pretty terrible about that sometimes.
yeah, and it's like if we took the sensitivity around the specific issue out of play, like of this being COVID, this specific thing, and we compared it to anything in our past, like we've seen things like this before, and yet we've made decisions differently. And when we've made decisions that were similar to this, people didn't accept it. And
Mm,
it's I think that you made a really good point, because I've actually done a lot of contemplation around like the vaccination topic. And I think one of the most powerful things, because I study identity work as well. And so one of the most important things that's happening is in this discussion and this very fast pushing and mandating of this shot is, in my opinion, getting people to the point to where they identify with having it or not having it. And because it's something that you can't technically go back on, it's now a part of your concrete identity. And by
Mm.
human psychology, we want to be a part of the winning team, the community. We want to be a part of the majority that is in agreement. And so I think there's a rapid push, but what people fail to realize is that even things like that is our identities are fluid and we never have to identify with those decisions.
Right. I don't identify with my polio vaccine,
Exactly.
for example.
Exactly. And so that's the biggest point that I think is important, because if we had a year ago said that, okay, we made some decisions, we made some decisions for everyone, we thought they were in the best interest of everyone, there's a lot of new information. There's a lot of new studies, and there's just the observation of what's happening in the world. If we could have said, like, I don't like, maybe it was right at the time, and now we have more information, we can make better decisions. We can change the identity of what's happening. But I, I'm not going to say like why I think that didn't happen, but it didn't happen.
Yeah.
We got so
Didn't happen.
stuck
Yeah.
that this is the way, and so committed in our individual identities and our identities of the collective that, like, we have to keep going down this way, because to admit to change directions
Yes.
would be to admit that we were wrong about something, and no one likes to be wrong, but it's not being wrong. That's what I like to say. It's, we're just getting more data every moment, and we can always make better decisions.
It's feedback.
Yeah.
It's learning.
Yeah, and it's like,
This is an interesting point, not just for politics and leadership, but also for like personal growth.
yes.
If you're unable to publicly admit that you made a
Yep.
mistake, you're shooting yourself in the foot twice. Not only are you like, okay, you think you're protecting yourself, but you're I think what happens is you prevent that growth from actually taking place, at least on a uh, conscious level.
Yeah.
Subconsciously, you might change the way you do things, but consciously, you're very stubborn about it. And then on the second thing is you're looking like an idiot,
Yeah.
and people see
These
straight
people
through
see
that kind of
straight
shit.
through it. Yeah. And to admit, to look at yourself in the mirror and to say that, like, mistakes have not been made in this process is, I think, lying to yourself. 'Cause I think it's
Mm.
becoming so obvious that where mistakes were made, and that's fine. I think as humans, we can
Hmm.
accept and forgive, like, oh, people are always doing their best when we make decisions, but when we commit to them, knowing that they may not be right going forward from this moment forward, and then we try to defend them, it's like we're starting to see right through it. And it's like, man, can you really support that anymore?
Uh-huh.
And I think that it's becoming harder and harder and harder and harder to trust what is being forced. Because why would something be forced if it was
If it wasn't
genuinely in the
what
best interest?
everyone
Yeah,
really truly wanted and needed,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Like, if we just asked ourselves that question, if as individuals we truly believed in all the decisions being made, why would there be so much pushback? Why would it
Hmm. Hmm.
need to be under literal physical force in some cases? Like,
Yeah.
history
Well, I
shows
mean,
us.
if you've seen the comments on Instagram and YouTube, you'll know that there's a certain level of animosity between both sides of the spectrum,
Yeah,
and it's a very easy argument to make if you're identified, like you say, with either or
right.
politics. Uh, so I think we're at the point now where it's really difficult to get through to people. But we what I think is happening is, and by the way, there's a fourth Matrix movie coming out. There couldn't be a better time for that to happen, right?
Exciting.
Right? Because we need that red pill ASAP, um, and I think the red
Yeah,
pill in our reality is conversations like this
yeah,
where we can freely discuss things without that 30-second requirement on public television where you get cut off and you get ridiculed if you're making a point that's against the narrative. We need more long form conversations. We need to build communities like I'm going to talk about your
yeah.
community
Thank you.
shortly. Um, but people like yourself, people like Russell Brand, who are really using their platform to kind of like shift consciousness away from mainstream and towards, you see, the red pill, I think, is alternative media. And obviously there's stuff in alternative media that's just like, whew, I
Yeah,
don't know if you're on
there's a
the,
spectrum.
I think
There's a full spectrum
but
for sure.
there's a full spectrum. And so with critical, with these critical thinking
Hmm.
skills, that maybe people are lacking, but can be taught. I think we can be adults and make good decisions for ourselves based on everything we have at hand. But I think it gets to you got to get to the point where people are willing to take that red pill, and the red pill has been made to look so woo woo and crazy if you were to ever even consider believing some of the things that are outside of the mainstream, that so many people have problems actually taking that first step.
Yeah, and I'm personally really grateful. I say this almost every day, like when I'm doing my gratitude practice, how grateful I was that I don't say it this way, but I took the red pill before 2020. I took the red pill, and so I was already thinking, like, just in my training back in the day, I would always view things like, if the majority of culture is saying something's good for me, it's probably not good for me. And I'm going to look really hard at it, and I'm going to make a decision for myself. And um and I say that
Which is really
half
sad when you
jokingly,
think
but
about it.
yeah, also not. And if you really look at issue by issue, and so I already was like really counterculture in my behavior. Not to the point of like disruption or harming other people, but like I was just choosing different things for myself.
You were a healthy
Yeah,
rebelliousness,
exactly, exactly.
right?
And the way people are articulating, like you said, Russell Brand, and they're communicating so openly, and the invitation for people to use their critical thinking, I think, is so powerful. And what I've been contemplating recently, because I went through a really strong period of frustration and even anger with the whole population of like, why? Why are we not thinking? And I was
Mhm.
truly angry. And it was eating me up inside. I was like, why are we not thinking? And what I've come to, like, in a lot of contemplation on this, is that it's not that anyone is stupid. In fact, I think we're so intelligent of a species, individually and collectively. We have critical thinking skills. However, when we are in a state of overwhelmed, triggered fear, those turn off
We
by
suppress them.
design. It's
Mm,
like if
mhm.
you are in real danger, you're hanging from a cliff, you're being chased by a wild animal. I've been charged by a grizzly before. You don't have time to think. You literally, the adrenaline floods, and you make
I
full
assume it went well because you're
I'm
still
still here,
here.
yeah. Fortunately, it went after the animal and not after me.
Wow.
Yeah, but
Yeah. Well, at least we didn't have a revenant scene.
yeah,
W-
yeah, it's
that would have been.
those are I mean, and that's the other thing is we've gotten so, I won't go down this. I'll stay on the critical thinking, but we've gotten so detached from what death really is that people really don't have much of an experience with it, and
Yeah.
let alone an everyday experience, which was the majority of our human history have had really direct, almost daily, regular experience with death in some way.
That's a really good
Yes,
point, actually.
yes, and I think that's a really big problem of what's happening, because all the decisions are to avoid death and not to think
But
about
so we don't have a
it. Yep,
relationship with it. So we're
we're
so fucking
misunderstanding it,
scared.
very much misunderstanding it, and a lot of my experiences that I put myself into, um, it give me a really direct and different connection with death than I think a lot of people have, and a different, my understanding of what happens after death and my beliefs around it, or that lead me to not really fear it, but respect it and
Hmm.
admire it so
Hmm.
much that I live a full life. Um, but to get off the death thing and back to the critical thinking, is that by design, by being in this overwhelmed, triggered, emotional, charged fear state, we don't have access to the things that we need to get us out of it. And so the only thing that will get us out of that sympathetic, stressed, overwhelmed fight or flight state is to stop and slow down
Yeah.
and breathe slowly and breathe slowly. And many people will need to do a lot of this because they're very overwhelmed. Because what that does is that calms the nervous system down. It starts to flip it back to the parasympathetic, which is our rest and recovery and recharge. And when we're in that, we realize, oh shit, we're not actually in this like chaos, danger. I'm not currently unsafe in this moment right now. And that's an important switch because if I'm living my life thinking I'm in immediate danger at every moment, my decisions are going to be
Right.
drastically different than if I'm realizing, okay, I'm safe. I can process what's happening. There's no immediate danger. Like I can
Like it's all happening in our mind, right?
exactly. That's where
We're
fear
driving
happens. Yep.
this narrative that there's something to be running away from all the time.
Correct. It's in our mind. Fear, that's the only place that fear happens is in the mind. And people will argue there's danger, but there's always danger. Most of us, especially if we have access to screens and we live in the first world, we don't live in immediate danger every day. There are people that do, don't get me wrong. Like with what's happening in the Middle East right now, like people are in real danger every day. But oftentimes not the one that are arguing about it, not the ones that are feeling unsafe in every moment. And so there's a difference between feeling unsafe in the body, which is what we do when we're in fear, and being in real immediate danger when you're being charged by a
Mm.
grizzly or hanging from a cliff or getting pushed, held under by a wave, which has happened to me as well while surfing, just being held under and tossed and tossed and tossed. Like that's real immediate danger. Being stuck up at gunpoint, immediate danger, and you need the responses in those moments to kick in. But as soon as you get out of them, they need to switch back to our normal state, which is relaxed and calm and critical. And most people aren't allowing themselves to do that. And so the slow,
You think it's a weakness, right? When people are thinking it's a weakness to slow
I,
down, to stop, to take a day
I
off.
think that's culturally conditioned for sure. It's a very like masculine principle to continue to go and push and push and push. And there's a value in it, but there's just as much an equal value in the resting and the taking a
Yeah.
step back and the observing the actions we're taking. So we know, are the actions we're taking actually the best ones? And so that
Hmm.
slowing down allows us to create separation from what's actually happening. And in that separation, we can see it differently. It's like a fish in the water cannot explain what water is. It's only until it jumps out of the water and is like, whoa. And that's what we can do ourselves when we take ourselves out of the situation and we observe ourselves and we be like, wow, look at how we're acting. Look at how we're speaking. Look at how we're interacting with other human beings. Look at how we're thinking.
Hmm.
And if you can really take a step back and look at those things and say, "Yeah, I'm really happy. I'm like fully like content, satisfied. I believe like I'm going to keep doing that." Then great. Zoom back in and keep doing them. But I imagine most people when they zoom out, if they keep zooming out and they're slowed down and they're breathing, they'll realize like, "Oh wow, I didn't even realize I've been doing this. I didn't even realize my head's been down and I've just been in this loop. I didn't even realize I was thinking these heinous thoughts about another human being."
That's why I think it's important to do it on a schedule,
Yes.
right? It's important to
Yes.
schedule your rest and kind of reflection. And I think for the best of us, well, maybe not the best of us, but for the people who take this the most seriously, that's where the routine, the daily routine comes in, where you have like that meditative time to just sit and, or whatever it is you like to do,
Yeah.
where you can just cut your mind off from all the shit and really kind of reset yourself. I don't do it all the time, but I recognize how important it is. When I do, it makes a big difference. When I broke up with my ex girlfriend, I was so distraught and I decided to take a month out, literally a month out in Malaysia. I just got somewhere I wasn't even familiar with. I had no idea what to expect. I sat
So cool.
not all day, but I sat in the mornings and the evenings and just stared out into the distance, and it changed me so much. Like, I can't, if anyone's listening to this thinking there's no way I could do that, well, you don't have to go to Malaysia,
Yeah.
but if you just do that practice, it will change your perspective and your energy and your everything. It can change everything, actually,
Yeah.
I think, personally.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's all free and we all have access to it. My favorite is nature. I'm actually going to backpack in Zion next week for just about a long weekend or a week. And there's something that happens when we eliminate all of the things that are consuming us. Like you said, you just see differently.
Are you going to leave your phone? Are you going
I will
to
not have my phone on. No, I will not have my phone on. Yeah. And completely disconnected.
it's hard.
It is the same thing I did when I went to the desert for Burning Man last week. I mean, I did tune in. I checked in one time, but checked right back out and realized in that moment um, how much I manage on a daily basis because there was like 1,000 notifications across all these different applications and all these emails, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Whoa!" I was like, "It's only been 5 days."
Guys, I got to go home.
Yeah, I was like, "Whoa!" And then the immediate relief of just saying no, turning it off, and then going back to being present in the moment with the people that I was with was the most relieving thing ever. It's like, "Wow,
It's crazy how much power we give
yes,
to things that aren't even that important. Like, you can trick yourself into thinking, I got to respond to this. I got to get in touch with this person. I got to, and then let's say, for example, you lost your phone, or let's say, for example, something happened and you just couldn't do it. You would quickly realize how unimportant those things actually were.
yeah,
Or someone in the family passes away, God forbid, right? I mean, these
yeah,
are the things that wake you up. And so wake yourself up before you're woke up, right? I say that a lot. I say, die before you die.
yeah."
Because if you don't, you're going to live in fear, and you're going to not do the things you want to do.
I love that you said that, die before you die. That's one of the practices a mentor gave me as a meditation where I literally experienced myself on my deathbed. And in that moment, if you can put yourself there, all of the BS fades away and you realize what's really important. And in that practice, you can continuously remind yourself, oh, I'm going to call my mom today. I haven't talked to her for a couple of days. I'm going to tell her I love her. I'm going to do this. I'm gonna whatever it is. I'm gonna cancel this thing that I didn't even want to do, and I'm gonna take this day to myself. Whatever it is, but you just get this regular check in of like what's really important here. And 99% of the stuff we're worrying about, thinking about, even doing in our lives is not actually important. At least
Speak,
that's what it was for
speak,
me.
speak to me a little bit about, because you mentioned that it's something that you do within your camp.
Mhm.
And tell me about what you're doing with your business and how you're helping people. I believe it's called what, Training Camp for the Soul,
Yeah.
and you run it with a lady.
Yeah, yeah. The founder, Anat Perry, she's my business partner, and we co-facilitate together. And great partnership of masculine, feminine, and she has a long history in this world of healing, and I have a long history in the world of business and coaching, and so we really work well together. Um, we like I said at the beginning, we have a very like structured way where we can take people through and we can help them identify the things that are truly holding them back in their life because there's levels to the awareness and most people are only aware at the level of the story they're telling themselves.
Hmm.
And once we start asking a few questions, we get one layer deeper and one layer deeper and eventually we get to at least the layer of where did this come from? And it's usually mother and father are the primary drivers of childhood development. Either they were there or they weren't there, and they represent different things in development. But we get to those because in that moment where you realize, oh, this isn't who I am, this is just something that I learned to be.
Like a story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And 100% of who we are, we learn to be. 100% of the way we see the world, we learned that's the way the world is. And so that story of the way you are and the way the world is keeps getting spoon fed to you every day, every moment. And you're taking it all in by what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and it's all getting taken in. And before you know it, you just unconsciously believe I'm this way, other people are this way, the world is this way. And like we were talking about identity, people just believe that's the way it is. And then we start peeling back the layers and that little bit of like cracking the window open of saying, oh, that's not actually the way it is. That's not truth. That's just been my truth for my lifetime because that's what I learned. And then it kind of gives a little bit of opportunity, and then we dive in and we pull out the root of where that came from. That's a really important part of the process that gets missed in a lot of personal development is it's got to come from the root of
Yeah.
whenever this first got embedded in the body. When did this first become a pattern? And or the most
Is it like the further down you go, generally speaking, the harder it is to address? Or can you get over these things like an epiphany?
instantly. Yeah, and usually
Oh,
how it works is it's it's oftentimes easier to start with things that are less emotionally attached. Um, the deeper it is, the more resistance there's going to be to going into it.
the harder to
Yeah,
get to it
exactly,
might be.
exactly.
Right.
And
Okay.
so it's all the way that we do it is incredibly it's actually very slow and very gentle, and we go at the pace of the client, not the other way around. I've been in a lot of healing and retreat experiences where it's very like forced, and you like force yourself into like get angry and yeah, and this is a lot more of like what's there for you, and it allows them to kind of dig through their own stuff at the pace they feel comfortable and safe doing it, and then we just help them navigate to it. And everyone has the capacity to do it. That's why I encourage people. Everyone has the capacity, but little to no one was taught how to do this. We weren't taught how to
Mhm.
go beyond the conscious mind and start asking some really simple questions. And the deeper we go, the simpler the beliefs get. And what I
Okay.
mean by that is like at the very core, a belief of I'm not good enough, or I'm not
Yes.
enough, or I'm inherently broken, or if I don't achieve, I won't be loved, or
Mhm.
others will abandon me. Like that.
That's me. That was mine
Yeah,
right
that's one
there,
of mine too.
basically. I still have it to a certain
Yeah,
degree,
yeah,
but
and for sure. And that's the thing is like it's not to be fixed. That's the other thing we really talk about in our program. It's not to be fixed. It's about loving that part of yourself and that little child that was abandoned and he needed something differently. And we help people close the loop on that and teach them how to reparent themselves when it comes up in your adult life. So when this comes up, you're like, oh, there's that abandonment thing again. It's not that it's necessarily going to forever disappear, but there's less attachment and you now have tools. You're like, oh, there's that thing. Okay, cool. Like, I know I'm making a story up about my girlfriend here. She's not going to abandon me. Cool. She's here. This is just my shit. And so you can change your behavior with like the actions with the new belief. And this is where we started talking about the first two phases of the ego and then the just the practice of doing it. The third phase is when you do the practice enough times, like when you start rewriting the abandonment story of like, no, others are there for me, others support me, I trust others, whatever it is.
do you need to have, like, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but, like, because I know you're on a flow here, but do you need to have, like, community feedback for specific like, that specifically? Because I would imagine that it's that fear of abandonment ties directly into
Yep.
community. Like, if you have that feedback, "Oh, they really are there for me because 'cause they're saying they're there for they're showing me that they're there for
Yep.
me." But if you don't have that, then so I would imagine there's some components here you need to,
Yes.
uh
100%. It's very, very helpful to have like everyone around us is a mirror for our own stuff. And so we're seeing it reflected back to us if we're paying attention. There's two levels to the development though. There's the self development and then there's the development as it relates to others and community. And like you're saying, like that abandonment might be tied to other people. So the first level of self has to be really strong before we can really start dealing with the others. Because if we start dealing with the other stuff and we're not strong enough in ourself, we're going to collapse, we're going to close, we're going to contract, and it's not going to work. And that's why a lot of people come into our work because of relationship problems or something with their parents or something with their partner or the husband or the wife or their kids. And it's a lot of times about relationships, maybe relationship to money or relationship to their career. But then we dig one layer deeper and there's something that's in the self that first needs to be addressed.
Would you say that mixing with others is equally as difficult for people who are suffering from these belief systems that are erroneous belief systems in both the introverted people and the extroverted people? Because extroverted people, you could kind of argue, oh, they've got these people skills,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like, I think you could have it from both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see any material difference between those personality types, because this goes deeper than those behaviors. It goes to really core belief systems, and everyone has them. It's just a matter of like which ones are really showing up in your life, which ones are holding you back, which ones are limiting you in some way. And so, yeah, as far as introvert extrovert, I think actually extroverts probably just got more practiced in protective mechanisms on how to interact with others while not going to those places. They just
Yeah,
created different skills, and we all have protective
yeah.
mechanisms. Some people go inside, some people get aggressive and push back, some people just leave their minds and their bodies. These are all just classic five personality patterns of protectors. But
Joe Biden just walks away,
yeah,
you know.
that's a protector from like,
It
oh
is a
no,
protector.
something's coming up here. And we all have them. It's like even physical ones. When I'm in a conversation and I like cross my arms and I kind of like contract, that's a physical protective mechanism. I'm literally covering my vitals, and because I don't feel safe in this. And so we teach
That's why whenever I talk to anyone, I just
open
open
up.
my arms.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking.
Yeah, and that's it's it seems really silly, but the body patterns the emotions in the mind, and the mind patterns the body and the emotion, and they all intertwine. And so we teach people the full spectrum. So we teach people the physicality of opening your body and to notice what's happening in your body when you're emotionally triggered or charged. When this happens, what do you feel in your body? Because it's all this feedback loop. And when we can identify and interrupt the feedback loop, we can change it. But
Mm.
until we can
Can I
identify,
ask you a question on that triggered issue? Because we've had that word appear a couple of times, a few
uh,
times in this conversation. That was never really a word
yeah,
before last
yeah,
year. What are your thoughts about, I think it's Disney, but it might be Netflix too. It says that there's a trigger warning. You may get
yep,
triggered by this. There's trigger warnings now
yeah.
for things. Do you think that's necessary? Do you think that's something good,
No,
or
I don't.
is that,
I
I don't
don't.
know,
So
is that making things a little worse for us?
I believe it is because of the nature of my work, and what I know to be true is that everyone has the capacity to feel their own emotions. However, people less and less are willing to do that. And so the more I'm unwilling to feel what's happening inside of me, the more I require other people around me to not trigger me.
So you're retreating. It's actually, it's an
It
enabler.
is. It is.
We're being warned in
It's
advance of something that we should be able to deal
right.
with.
It's saying it's saying and like there's exceptions to that. Like there's things that you can see and you can't unsee and traumatic things, but like
Right.
the level that we're at is
Political
yes.
things might trigger you.
Exactly. Anything. We're making up words now that trigger. Like we're making up experiences that people are saying they're triggered for it, because and there's a long story of like why this happens. There's something that happens in the development of those people. They put themselves in a role that there must be a villain to play their role, and it's it's now getting to the point to where it's culturally acceptable to be a victim to your experience. And
Right.
I have compassion for that when people are in it, but it's also, there is always an opportunity to transcend that triangle of perpetrator, victim, and hero. Um, and everyone is their own, at the point in which they're adults, they are their own parents now. They are their own hero. They are required to be responsible for their emotions, to be a
Hmm.
truly mature adult. However, people are more and more unwilling to do it. And so they're now at the point of expecting other people. It's not even a
That's what
request
that's it.
anymore. It's an expectation that you must change your life because I cannot handle what's happening inside of me. That's dangerous, because what's the line on that? We're seeing the line
And
right
where does it
now.
lead?
We're
Uh,
literally in it
yeah.
right now. We're collectively determining what's the line of telling everyone else how to behave, act, and what to do with their body because I don't know how to take care of mine. That's a dangerous path, and it starts with words, and it starts with the emotions, and now we're seeing it transcend into,
Institutions and,
yeah,
yeah, government and,
exactly,
yeah, and where it plays perfectly to the kind of, to that kind of transfer of power.
yeah.
But again, not to dive into the whole
Right.
political argument, but I don't think people realize how dangerous this actually really
A-
is.
and I think it's actually helpful to not dive into the politics of it, to understand the true humanity of it, of what's happening.
Mm,
And I
yeah,
think
yeah.
the problem is people are too quick to go into the specific issues or the specific talking points, that they miss the level that's much deeper than that. That's like much more
Mhm,
important
mhm.
than that. And
Like the quality of your life
yes,
and the quality of the lives of the people around you.
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Your family, for example. I mean, I wanted to ask you this a little earlier. I kind of missed my opportunity, but I guess might as well just ask it now. Um, Individualism.
Mhm.
Do you think it's kind of lost its? I mean, in many ways, I love my individual freedom, right? Of course, but I can see now, looking back, and with at least a contrast in social behavior, how damaging too much of a push for individualism is becoming. And how how do you kind of balance in your life your needs for individual freedom and then the needs for your family and your community?
It's an amazing conversation, and it's at the root of, you mentioned Ken Wilber earlier. He does the integral work, and he wrote a book called The Theory of Everything, and in it explains a lot of different maps and models that talk about the development of humans, and explains a lot, honestly. But it's a very like deep, heady book. It's a lot of
He's a deep
he's
guy.
like
Grace and Grit made me cry. Like, I
incredible
didn't
work.
know what to do after reading that book.
Incredible work, and he's getting downloads from like intelligence far beyond like what most people have access to. And so these aren't made up things. These are, he took a bunch of different models from all of these psychology and religion and all these things, and just mapped a development of, we'll call it humans, and it applies to both individuals and collective. And one of the models that gets referenced a lot is spiral dynamics, and in that, it's how we develop from pure survival towards like enlightenment consciousness, and all of the predictable stages that happen along the way as we spiral up to that. And we do it as an individual and we do it as a society. And what happens is every time we spiral to the next one, we spiral from individual to collective, and collective to individual, collective to, and so we're kind of like,
Hmm.
almost like what are those things called, the that swing back and forth, pendulum. We're penduluming from one to the other and one to the other. And what happens is when you leave one, initially you have to reject a lot of the things of the reasons why you're in that one to get to the next level. So you have to
Okay, let
reject.
me try and drill into this
Yeah.
with you because I'm trying to get my head
Yeah.
around it too, as I'm sure other
Yeah, for
people
sure.
listening are. Is that because we have individual thought and experience,
Yes,
and we then need to share that with the collective so that we can all benefit and grow together?
exactly.
Vice
Exactly.
versa, I guess. You download from the
It's
collective too.
in itself is a paradox because the individual is it's like the individual is the drop of water in the sea. The drop is the sea and the sea is the drop of water. And so we're all a part of the holistic collective. But also as individual, we have individual needs. And so they can appear at times in conflict, but ultimately they are the same thing. And the paradox is holding both at the same time and determining like which one. Okay, so one may be weighing 1% in one direction of favor. How important is that? And do I need to swing it back the other way? What's the most important thing in this moment? And here's the part of like forgiveness is that it's impossible to know because the story is still being written. And so if we're caught up in being right about our decisions, we can largely put those the right and the wrong conversation down. And the way I explain that is natural law is if we are not harming ourselves or other people, other sentient beings, like that is basically the foundation of like natural law. And so if we're not doing that, like that's right and wrong right there. Period. If we're not harming other people, forcing other people, okay, we're good. The rest is subjective and we're still figuring it out. And the subjective part comes from our personal experience, what we've learned over a lifetime, and if you believe it, past lifetimes and other influences. And so we have all these eyes that we're seeing through, but every set of eyes on this planet is seeing through a different lens. And that's the individual part. And what what is the most benefit to us as individuals is to communicate and be open to other perspectives so that when you hear like when we're having this conversation, you're hearing my perspective and I'm hearing yours, and what we're essentially doing is we have this bucket of perspectives, and I now have your perspective on this issue in my bucket, and I'm going to talk to someone else about it and I'm going to put it in my bucket, and you might take mine and put it in your bucket. And it's not to prove that yours is right or mine's right or anyone else is right, but the more we collect in our buckets, the more broad our perspective can be, and that's all data. But when we reject every other perspective, how broad is ours? It's very narrow
Mhm.
and we can't see.
Mm.
And so, what we believe to be good for us and good for the collective is only based on a very narrow view. So, the goal isn't actually narrowing our opinions and perspectives. The goal really should be to take in as much as we
As
can.
much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I admittedly over my development have favored one over the other. And it's all very like I said, it's all very predictable based on what phase of development you're in. They call them memes and what meme you're in. There's different value sets and there's different challenges. And I've very predictively gone through those, and I can recall the moments where I would start to break to the other one. And so it's again, it's not to hold one to a higher degree isn't right or wrong. It's just to accept where I'm at and to know that one isn't more important to the other. They're in fact this part of the same thing. And that's hard for people to understand that are still believing that are still either realistically or believing they're still meeting their minimum safety needs, they can't think to that. They can't think in that capacity like we were talking about. They don't have access to it because they're still in some level of survival state. And so it's not their fault. It's by design.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of Dr. Jordan Peterson?
I haven't dove too much into his work, to be honest. It's never called me. I know some people speak highly of him. I can't really speak too much about
You're either an avid fan or you're a
it.
hater.
Oh, really?
I don't think there's anything in between.
Yeah.
But, because he's such an opinionated and he has his opinions are very
Mm,
controversial,
mhm.
and I think the reason why is because a lot of what he says triggers
Yes.
people to the truth, and he makes a really good point that community is it has many mechanisms that are kind of unspoken that allow for the community to flourish and grow and survive. It's kind of like evolutionary in the sense that we've figured out that there are certain things that we should and shouldn't do if we're able to grow and be safe and be part of a healthy collective. The moment that we withdraw from those rules or those requirements, let's say, the moment that we take ourselves out and say, sorry, I'm the most important
Mhm.
thing in my life, and therefore what I say is what I'm going to do. Well, if you look at history, you can see that's never really worked out well.
No.
In actual fact, it's probably worked out pretty bad for people who were affected by that person and their decisions,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
um, and so his point is there are things that you're not going to like. There are things that you're going to think, well, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't have time for this shit. Or, this is so, it's kind of embarrassing or humiliating, but it's all part of an evolutionary mechanism that's designed for the collective to survive.
Yes.
And if we don't understand that, which is what's happening now, in my opinion, we've lost that ability to be okay with the things that, we actually need to do as
Yeah.
part of a healthy society. Then we're in for a breakdown of society.
In one way, we've lost it, and in another way, it's been weaponized. It's
Mm.
weaponized to say that you don't care about the collective unless you do this thing. And it's like, wait a minute.
Right.
Wait a minute. A, is that true? No. You're making it true by saying it that way. But also B, what does this have an effect on the individual? And then by nature, what are the downstream effects on the collective because of this? So we can't
You're talking
just
about like things like, I mean, essentially, this is the argument, which is why it's so hard to reconcile whether you should take a vaccine or not.
yeah, anything that's mandated or forced upon someone, their behavior. And it's there is a that's the reason why it's a dance. There's the dance of the collective and the trust in the collective. But what we're seeing now very clearly is people are losing trust in the leaders or the perceived leaders of the collective. And so
Nice. Yeah.
because, like you said, we all have intuitive senses of what's good in the community and what keeps it alive and thriving. And intuitively, people are starting to wake up to the fact that what we're doing is not actually intuitively great for the community. And so when we say that, like, you must individually do this for the good of the collective, that's a weapon because,
Yes. Right. When it's explicitly mandated,
exactly,
not when it's discussed in open and
yes.
kind of collectively agreed on.
And the beautiful part about community is that it collectively decides its values. So if the majority of individuals agree on values and that's what keeps the community whole and flowing, those are the values. That is why mandating ideas is not possible for humanity and never works, never has worked for the history of humans to literally control large groups of other humans. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's going against the natural law of the community. where the
which is more of
collective
an
is literally,
organic
yeah,
kind
the
of,
collective is
yeah.
literally saying, okay, this is feeling good, this is feeling good. And then someone else is like saying, one individual or small group is like, no, we're
Right. I've
doing
got a
this.
gun, so everyone's going to listen to me.
Exactly. And it,
This is why decentralization of power is driving the force behind the adoption of things like
yep,
Bitcoin, because people are just so, I think, you know, a lot of people get into it because it's a bull run
yeah,
market, but I think there's a lot more deeper things happening, and I think the most awake of us have realized that if we're ever going to be able to get the ability to have that that phenomena that you talk about, which is organic community adoption and decision making, and we have to decentralize. We
yeah,
have to take the power away from those who hold the guns and kind of give it back to the people. And I know this is another huge conversation to have, but I just wanted to touch on it because it's happening now.
yeah,
It's happening right now, and I personally feel if we do bandy together, cryptocurrencies could be a good way into it. Right, I say that not because it's profitable or anything like that. I say it just because that technology it could be the difference between getting handed whatever it is that you need to survive from, let's say, the powers that be, which seems to
that's
be
a
where we're
great point.
heading,
Yeah,
or being able to say, I'm going to, do this with my life today, and I think everyone would be happier with the latter.
yeah, yeah. And like I just quoted at some point, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is now. Um,
Yeah,
the same applies for our decisions in this. It's like, eh, do you want to get so far down the road that you don't have choices? Or do you want to start making choices now that maybe is a little uncomfortable, and like maybe it's maybe challenging in some ways, but is in the long term best interests of yourself and the collective. And you're right. I think that the crypto is something that plays into that. A friend of mine says that a Bitcoin is a vote. It's not an investment. It's literally a vote
nice.
in a different way of being. And when I can objectively say, like, it's not objective, but for myself, I know so certainly that our finance, our food, our medical systems, our education systems are all broken. They are so broken, and I believe that at my core. But I don't. I'm not saying I have the answers to it, but to change systems, we have to create better systems. We can't just blame the systems that are existing. I didn't even leave in the political system. That one's definitely broken too. But we have to create better governance systems that work. And in this way, this is a very new governance system for the financial system that has absolute legs to like kick out the legs of our current financial system. It does. And the
Well,
more,
I mean, like, if you look at just, and again, I'm really diving into a little bit of detail here, but if China recently banned crypto
yeah,
mining, and people were so worried about what that would do because it's never been done
insane.
before. It was like unprecedented. And a lot of the farms for mining these Bitcoins, which is what drives the demand in the currency, were just all based in, most of them were based in
Yeah.
China. So they removed all of them, but it didn't really dent
Mm.
what was actually happening with Bitcoin. It continued to go because of that, again, that adoption and that understanding that, well, one, because of the adoption and the understanding that this is the future, but two, because it was just so, I mean, this kind of like, I'm speaking to the strength and the integrity of the actual system. It has
Yeah.
legs. It really does have legs. It couldn't be touched by that. Um, so I'm very, I don't want to use a market term. I was going to say I'm very bullish about
Yeah.
it, but I am very
Yeah.
bullish about it, and I'm really excited to see if we can make something out of this.
Yeah, yeah, me too. And it took me years, and I've been in these circles for a while. It took me years to really understand the value of it beyond just an investment. Because I caught on to the investment or like fairly like early for me. And I was like, okay, I get that. I get what's happening here. I understand markets and I understand the emotional drivers of markets. I was like, okay. But it took me years to really understand the viability of what's happening right now and the real value that it can provide. Um, and uh, yeah, I mean, I think that the blockchain technology and applying to one of my mentors brought up a point about like using it even in things to track the actions and decisions of politicians to literally create
Yeah.
real time records, unchangeable voting records of this is what this person stands for. Think about the transparency of that because right now most people only hear what they're told to hear, and that changes every single day. And people will even see like video clips of the words coming out of people's mouths that contradict what they're saying today, and they'll be like, no, they don't really.
Yes, yes,
It's like, what?
that's a real thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like the way that this can be adopted to many different areas of our life.
So, every part of
Yeah,
life, pretty much every
really
part of life.
valuable.
Well,
Teach that
that was like
apart.
that's like an extra nugget of interest here in this conversation, I guess, that people got free of charge, got a little bit of education
Yeah.
about the Bitcoin and the crypto markets. But I think, without like going further into that topic, this is a good place to kind of like taper it
Yeah.
off. And I think it's been an excellent conversation, the longest one I've had for a
Mhm.
while. And, I greatly appreciate everything that you've shared with me today. I know it's going to help a lot of people listening to this. Speaking of which, if they do want to follow up with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the ways that I would say are best are to follow me on Instagram at Chris Marhefka, and then trainingcampforthesoul.com is my company. That's where we do a lot of this healing and rewriting of your script and your story and your patterns. Trainingcampforthesoul.com. We've got a program that's starting really soon. We've got a retreat in October. We're constantly running programs. Uh,
Whereabouts do you usually do your retreats?
The next one is the next two actually are in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains outside of Denver.
Nice.
So, mhm.
And that's on purpose, right? You pick a place that's very.
I want to go to. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm
Uh,
just kidding. That's really beautiful. That's secluded. We have a beautiful retreat center. It's a Taoist like meditation place, and so it's like very healing, very peaceful. And
beats a convention room, I guess.
yeah, beats a hotel convention room for sure, for sure.
That's, yeah, and we're gonna sell you this at the end.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
uh, that sounds fantastic, man. I think you're changing the world with what you're doing. Really, genuinely think that we need more people like you, and I'm so privileged to have met you. Thank you for coming on.
yeah. Thank you for having me. This has been one of my favorite interviews, and I do a lot of these interviews, and I appreciate like really diving into this and having intelligent, articulate, and open conversations about it. It's like you said, when we can transcend the 5 second clips and the 30-second news articles, we can start to actually pull apart the nuances of thought and discussion and ideas, and I think we did today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe today and you won't miss the next episode. We cover topics like recovering from infidelity, online dating, managing chronic anxiety, and so much more. We're on all the popular platforms, so take your pick, and we'll see you soon.